Hi guys, it's Leanne and I am here today to review The Polygamist Daughter by Anna LeBaron and Leslie Wilson. I have a lot to say about this book and also kind of nothing to say about this book, so let's break it down into its component parts, shall we? Anna was born into a polygamist Mormon cult and was one of the 50 children of Ervil LeBaron, who was fairly famous for a little while for the 4 o'clock murders, which he engineered from his prison cell. He also engineered quite a few other murders and they actually ranged into the double digits. Anna is now in her 40s and, having escaped, is writing this memoir to tell us about her childhood experience and her experience of growing up and escaping from a polygamist cult. I had so many problems with this book, but first let me preface this review by saying A, I absolutely flew through this book. It is very, very simply written and that makes it very digestible. And B, I wasn't enjoying it all that much, but I clearly still kept reading to the end to find out what was happening. I never felt like DNFing it, so I have to be perfectly honest and put that out there right at the start. And now let's get on with the stuff that's wrong with it. The biggest issue with this book for me is that nothing happens for 2/3 of this memoir. Now, I know this is a memoir, it is not a fictional account, and so we are working on a predetermined timeline here. There is no liberties of fiction to help drive the narrative along, but it is perfectly possible in a memoir where not a lot happens for a short period of time to condense that part and extrapolate on all of the other interesting parts that might make people want to read. That didn't happen with this one at all. In fact, I think it's fair to say that for the first 2/3 of this book, we feel like we're following Anna every day of her childhood. It's actually kind of like listening to one of your friend's children while they recount their day again and again and again, and what you went over there for was the coffee and the adult conversation. And I know that sounds terrible. I didn't care about the child neglect in this novel. I did care, I just didn't care quite that much. And I think that is the key issue with the rest of this memoir, is that I was never made to care. I had really big problems with Anna's really limited child point of view in this book. The entire function of a memoir is to be able to look back on an experience and as an adult offer insight into what you went through. This instead read more like a diary. And that brings me back to Leslie Wilson's contribution to this book. I had never heard of Leslie Wilson before I picked this one up, and so I did some Google foo, and what I've discovered is that Leslie, as a contributor to this book, has written a diet book and some craft books, and while I'm not saying that those things are unworthy of any kind of attention, I am saying that I think that this story would have benefited from a more practiced and more experienced ghostwriter who had a better idea of pacing. Having now found out what Leslie has written in the past, I can sort of relate the tone of this book to some of those other sort of help manuals. And then we come to the last third of this book, and what I think should be emphasised here is that the reason that Anna left was not just because she wanted to date, which is pretty much the only thing that we hear about in this part of the book, but there's a couple of lines throughout scattered that says basically she doesn't want to be promised to a man as a favour from Ervil, as somebody, you know, who wants to join his Mormonist kingdom. She just wants to be able to make her own decisions as a teenager, and that should have been more emphasised, but it wasn't. So really, when Anna leaves the cult, you're kind of left on an anticlimax. It's like, okay, so she left. She didn't really go that far and it was pretty easy, and she just went to like a friend's house who'd also left the cult. Okay. Next. And lastly, I really disliked how this book ended. We get a lot about Anna's newfound devotion to God, and while I don't mind religion in any of the books that I read, I didn't really care because she doesn't explain what that means for her, just the moment of revelation where she realises that, you know, God is in her life. And it ends on this sort of really awkward semi-family reunion after she bumps into a guy working at a grocery store, and it just peters out into why? So yeah, that in conclusion is what I felt. I felt like I could have looked up all of this information on the internet and not read this novel, which was sad because it had so much potential, and Anna, I genuinely think, is a really nice person. So for what it's worth, I gave this one 3 stars only because I did stick with it to the end and I did read it in quite a short space of time, and it is very readable. Albeit there wasn't much substance in there. So if you do still feel like picking this one up despite my not so great experience with it, it comes out on March 21st. Also, I have linked below a BBC article about this book and about Anna, which has some pictures from those days, which I found really, really interesting, especially to be able to put faces to names, so I will link that below and you can check that out. I hope you all have a wonderful reading weekend and you are looking as much forward to me being back on my schedule as I am, and I will speak to you guys soon. Bye! Yes, apparently I have managed to successfully paint one hand, but not the other. Yay for post-sickness exhaustion.